Some people walk into a room and say very little, yet somehow they are the ones everyone remembers. It is not always the loudest person. It is not always the funniest person. And it is definitely not always the person trying the hardest to impress. Sometimes it is the person who feels grounded, present, clear, safe to be around but impossible to overlook. That kind of presence can seem mysterious when you are looking at it from the outside. You might think they were just born that way. You might assume they have natural confidence, natural charm, natural social intelligence. But what most people do not realize is that this kind of presence is rarely an accident. It is usually the result of something quieter and far more powerful: emotional intelligence. And once you understand what it actually looks like in real life, everything starts to change. Because emotional intelligence is not just about being nice. It is not just about understanding feelings. And it is not some soft skill that matters only in therapy rooms or relationship books. It shapes how people experience you. It changes whether people trust you or protect themselves from you, whether they feel seen by you or drained by you, whether your words land or disappear, whether your presence calms the room or unsettles it. And if you stay with me, you will see why emotionally intelligent people are so hard to ignore, not because they demand attention, but because they create an experience that people do not forget. That is the difference. Most people think attraction in human interaction comes from having the right words. They think respect comes from status. They think influence comes from being more dominant, more polished, more impressive. But the deeper truth is that people are constantly responding to something beneath your words. They are responding to your emotional state, to your awareness, to your ability to manage yourself, to whether they feel understood in your presence. This is why two people can say almost the same thing, and one lands with weight while the other feels hollow. The words may be similar. The energy is not. And this is where everything begins. Emotionally intelligent people stand out because they are not being thrown around by every passing feeling. They do not let every irritation become a reaction. They do not let every insecurity leak into the room. They are aware of what is happening inside them, and that awareness changes what comes out of them. That sounds simple. It is not easy. Because most people do not live from awareness. They live from habit. They feel something, and 5 seconds later they are speaking from it, acting from it, defending from it, withdrawing from it, or projecting it onto someone else. They do not pause long enough to notice what is actually happening. And when you do not notice what is happening inside you, your emotions begin driving your life from the shadows. You think you are being honest, but you are being reactive. You think you are being direct, but you are being defensive. You think you are just telling it like it is, but what you are really doing is handing your unprocessed frustration to everyone around you. People feel that even when they cannot name it. That is one of the hidden truths about human connection. People may not always remember your exact words, but they remember how your presence felt in their nervous system. They remember whether they felt braced, judged, ignored, confused, drained, dismissed, or safe. They remember whether they had to protect themselves around you. Now here is where it gets more important. If you have ever wondered why some people seem naturally magnetic, why others seem quietly powerful, why some people can handle tension without collapsing into it, Why some people make others feel open instead of guarded, the answer often comes back to one thing. They are not at war with themselves every minute. They have learned to notice what they feel without being owned by it. They have learned to listen without rushing to defend. They have learned to see beyond their own immediate perspective. They have learned to regulate before they respond. And because of that, they are easier to trust. That trust is not built in one dramatic moment. It is built in dozens of subtle moments, small moments, easy-to-miss moments, moments where most people lose the room without realizing it, when they interrupt, when they make someone else's pain about themselves, when they turn discomfort into blame, when they cannot tolerate feedback, when they listen only long enough to prepare their reply, when they need to win every emotional exchange. That is the trap. Because people often think connection is built by saying the perfect thing. But more often, connection is damaged by all the unnecessary things we do when we do not know how to handle ourselves. So let's go deeper. At the center of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and self-awareness is far more rare than people think. A lot of people have self-consciousness. That is not the same thing. Self-consciousness is being preoccupied with how you are being perceived. Self-awareness is understanding what is actually happening inside you. One makes you more anxious. The other makes you more clear. That distinction matters because many people spend their lives obsessed with how they come across, but almost no time understanding why they react the way they do. They notice embarrassment. They notice rejection. They notice whether someone liked what they said, but they do not notice the deeper patterns underneath their emotional behavior. They do not notice that criticism instantly makes them feel small. They do not notice that silence makes them feel rejected. They do not notice that disagreement feels like disrespect. They do not notice that being overlooked wakes up an old wound. They do not notice that certain people make them perform. And when you do not notice your patterns become your personality. You start saying things like, "That's just how I am." But that is not always who you are. Sometimes that is just what you have practiced for years. Stay with me, because this next part matters. The reason self-awareness makes people more compelling is not because it makes them perfect. It makes them honest in a deeper way. An emotionally intelligent person can feel frustration without instantly becoming harsh. They can feel insecure without turning manipulative. They can feel hurt without pretending they are above it. They can feel anger without letting anger drive the car. That creates something rare. Consistency. Not robotic consistency. Human consistency. The kind where people know what version of you they are likely to meet. The kind where your mood does not hijack the room. The kind where others do not have to spend energy predicting whether you are okay today. People relax around that. And relaxed people remember you. Think about how exhausting it is to be around someone who is emotionally unpredictable. You never know whether a small comment will offend them, whether a disagreement will become drama, whether your honesty will be punished, whether their insecurity will turn into criticism. Even if that person has good qualities, the emotional cost of being around them becomes heavy. Now compare that to someone who can notice their own state without spilling it everywhere. Someone who can say, "I think I am reacting more strongly than I need to right now." Someone who can step back instead of escalating. Someone who can recognize, this is touching something in me, and I do not want to confuse that with the full truth. That kind of person feels different. Grounded, mature, trustworthy. That is not boring. That is attractive. Because emotional maturity carries weight. Most people are used to being around reactivity, so when they encounter someone who has learned how to stay present under pressure, it stands out immediately. It feels like strength without hardness, clarity without arrogance, confidence without performance, and that is hard to ignore. But there is another layer to this. Self-awareness is not just about noticing your emotions. It is about noticing the stories attached to them. This is where most people get stuck. They feel an emotion, and they assume the emotion is the full truth. If they feel dismissed, they conclude they were disrespected. If they feel anxious, they conclude something is wrong. If they feel embarrassed, they conclude they looked foolish. If they feel threatened, they conclude the other person is attacking them. But feelings are real without always being reliable narrators. That changes everything. Emotionally intelligent people understand that the first interpretation is not always the deepest one. They know there is often a gap between what happened and what their nervous system tells them happened. They know their emotional response may contain history, fear, projection, fatigue, ego, old pain, or unmet need. So instead of immediately reacting from the first story, they get curious. What exactly am I feeling? What triggered this? What am I assuming right now? Is this about the moment, or is it touching something older? What would a calmer version of me see here? That pause is powerful. It breaks automatic behavior. And that is why emotionally intelligent people seem more intentional. They are not just better at talking to others. They are better at not being fooled by their own first impulse. That is rare. It means they can enter difficult conversations without being swallowed by them. It means they can receive feedback without instantly collapsing into shame or exploding into defense. It means they can notice jealousy without turning bitter, disappointment without turning cold, attraction without becoming needy, conflict without becoming cruel. This is not emotional suppression. That is important. Suppression is pretending you do not feel what you feel. Emotional intelligence is feeling it fully and handling it wisely. Those are not the same. A lot of people confuse emotional control with emotional numbness. They think being composed means not caring. But the most emotionally intelligent people often feel deeply. Very deeply. They are moved. They are sensitive. They notice tension, tone, distance, sadness, shifts in energy. What makes them powerful is not that they feel less. It is that they know how to carry what they feel without making it everyone else's burden. That is a skill, and it changes how people experience you. Because when you can hold your own inner world with steadiness, others feel less pressure around you. They do not have to manage your reactions. They do not have to over-explain themselves to avoid setting you off. They do not have to edit every word in fear of your emotional volatility. Instead, they can meet you honestly. And honest connection is memorable. Now let's turn to something people often misunderstand. Empathy. Empathy is one of those words people use so often that it starts losing meaning. It gets flattened into being nice, agreeable, soft, or endlessly accommodating. But real empathy is not weakness. It is perceptiveness. It is the ability to enter another person's emotional reality without disappearing inside it. That matters because people are desperate to feel understood, not managed, not fixed too quickly, not analyzed from a distance. Understood. And yet, most conversations are not built for that. Most conversations are filled with subtle forms of self-focus. Someone starts sharing something painful, and the other person starts comparing, or advising, or redirecting, or minimizing, or reassuring too fast, or waiting for their turn. They are present physically, but emotionally, they are somewhere else. That is why so many people leave conversations feeling unseen, even after talking for a long time. Emotionally intelligent people are different here. When someone speaks, they are not only hearing the content, they are listening for the emotion underneath the content. They are noticing what is being said, what is not being said, what the person might be protecting, what tone is carrying, what silence is revealing. This is where they become hard to ignore. Because being deeply listened to is rare, and rare experiences stay with people. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you. Not politely, not mechanically, not in a way that felt like technique, but in a way that made you feel like your inner experience mattered. Chances are you still remember it. Why? Because in a world full of interruption, genuine attention feels like care. In a world full of performance, real presence feels intimate. In a world full of self-protection, understanding feels healing. That is the hidden power of empathy. It does not just make others feel good. It lowers resistance. It creates trust. It opens doors that force never could. But here is what most people do not realize. Empathy is not agreement. You can understand someone without approving of everything they do. You can validate a feeling without validating every conclusion attached to it. You can make someone feel seen without abandoning your own perspective. That is where emotional intelligence becomes mature rather than naive. A lot of people swing between two extremes. They either become emotionally detached and dismissive, or they become so accommodating that they lose themselves. But emotionally intelligent people learn the middle path. They can stay open without becoming porous. They can care without collapsing. They can understand without surrendering truth. That balance gives them quiet authority. And quiet authority is powerful because it does not need to shout. Let's make this real. Imagine someone comes to you upset after a difficult interaction. A reactive person might instantly pick sides, get emotionally pulled into the drama, and amplify the situation. Another person might dismiss it and say, "Don't worry about it, just move on." Someone else might hijack the moment with their own story. But an emotionally intelligent person does something different. They slow down. They listen. They help the person feel understood first. They may say, "That sounds like it really got under your skin," or "I can see why that would land the way it did," or "You were hoping for something different there." Notice what this does. It does not inflame. It does not dismiss. It does not make the moment about the listener. It gives the speaker room to breathe. And once people feel understood, they often become more capable of understanding themselves. That is one of the great paradoxes of human emotion. We regulate better when we feel seen. So the emotionally intelligent person becomes someone people seek out. Not because they always have answers, but because their presence makes clarity more possible. People feel less scrambled around them, less ashamed, less alone in what they feel. That is hard to ignore. And this is where everything starts to expand, because empathy is not only about listening to pain, it is also about reading emotional reality more accurately in everyday life. It is knowing when someone's shortness is stress rather than rejection. It is sensing when a joke hides discomfort. It is noticing when silence means overwhelm, not indifference. It is recognizing when someone is defensive because they feel exposed. It is understanding that behavior often makes more sense when you look beneath it. That does not mean excusing everything. It means interpreting more wisely. People who lack emotional intelligence tend to personalize everything. They assume every tone shift is about them. Every delay is rejection. Every disagreement is disrespect. Every boundary is coldness. Every difficult emotion in someone else is treated as a threat. That creates friction everywhere. But emotionally intelligent people widen the frame. They ask, what else could be true here? They consider context. They look beneath surface behavior. They do not rush to the most ego-protective interpretation. That makes them less reactive and more accurate. And accuracy changes relationships. Most people do not lose connection because they had bad intentions. They lose connection because they misread emotional reality again and again. They assume instead of asking. They project instead of noticing. They defend instead of understanding. They fill silence with conclusions that were never verified. That is where relationships quietly erode. Not always in dramatic betrayal, often in accumulated misunderstanding. This is why emotionally intelligent people are so impactful. They reduce unnecessary damage. They prevent small moments from becoming larger wounds. They know that the difference between a strong relationship and a fragile one is often not the absence of tension. It is the ability to move through tension without turning it into permanent distance. That takes another skill most people do not practice enough. Emotional regulation. Now this part matters more than people think, because regulation is where emotional intelligence stops being a nice idea and becomes visible in behavior. You can say you value self-awareness. You can say you care about empathy. But when disappointment hits, when someone challenges you, when you feel misunderstood, when you are tired, stressed, embarrassed, jealous, disappointed, insecure, ignored, or angry, that is where the truth shows. That is where people meet the real version of you. Regulation does not mean becoming expressionless. It means your emotions do not become your master. It means you can feel intensity without spreading intensity everywhere. It means you can remain connected to your values while under emotional pressure. That sounds simple until life tests it. Because emotional reactions feel convincing in the moment. They come with urgency. They tell you to reply now. Defend now, withdraw now, correct them now, punish the distance now, explain everything now. Make them understand now. And the more dysregulated you are, the more certain you feel. That is dangerous, because certainty is not always clarity. Sometimes certainty is just unregulated emotion wearing the mask of truth. That is the trap. Emotionally intelligent people learn how to slow that process down. Not perfectly, but enough to change outcomes. They notice when their body is tightening. They notice when their tone is sharpening. They notice when they are mentally rehearsing an argument instead of listening. They notice when they want immediate relief more than a wise response. They notice when their pride is writing the script. Those moments are decisive. Most people lose the moment there. They feel the surge and obey it. But emotionally intelligent people understand that the first wave is not the moment to trust blindly. They know that emotions often arrive faster than wisdom. So they create space, sometimes with a breath, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a pause before replying, sometimes with a simple sentence like, "Let me think about that," or "I want to respond well, not quickly." That is strength, not theatrical strength, real strength. Because anyone can express emotion, not everyone can stay responsible inside it. And people feel the difference immediately. There is a kind of safety that comes from being around someone who does not weaponize their pain in the moment. Someone who does not need instant emotional discharge. Someone who can hold tension without making everyone else pay for it. Again, people may not always explain it in these words, but they feel it. They trust it. And trust creates influence. This is why emotionally intelligent people often have more impact than louder people. Their nervous system does not create as much resistance in others. Their steadiness gives their words more credibility. Their restraint gives their presence more weight. Their responses feel chosen rather than impulsive. That makes others lean in. Here is a real-world truth most people miss. The ability to regulate emotion makes communication more persuasive. Not because it makes you manipulative, because it makes you coherent. If your tone, energy, and words are all fighting each other, people feel confused. If you are saying, "I am calm," while radiating anger, people trust your anger. If you are saying, "I am just trying to help," while sounding resentful, people trust the resentment. If you are saying, "I am listening," while interrupting every 30 seconds, people trust the interruption. Regulation aligns the message. That is why the same sentence can feel completely different, depending on the emotional state behind it. "We need to talk" can feel safe or threatening. "I understand" can feel comforting or patronizing. "I am fine" can feel neutral or loaded. Emotionally intelligent people understand that communication is more than language. It is emotional congruence. It is whether your inner state supports what your words are trying to say. And this is where most people get stuck without realizing it. They work on the script. They do not work on the state. They focus on wording, but not on regulation. They want better conversations, but bring the same unexamined energy into every one. That is why the results do not change. Stay with me, because the next part is what makes the difference in almost every close relationship. Emotionally intelligent people know how to handle conflict without turning it into identity warfare. That may sound dramatic, but think about how often ordinary disagreement becomes something much bigger. A missed expectation becomes, "You never care." A single criticism becomes, "You think I am not enough." A boundary becomes, "You are rejecting me." A misunderstanding becomes a character verdict. Suddenly, the issue is no longer the issue. The emotional meaning attached to it has taken over. And this is where everything breaks. Because once conflict becomes identity-based, people stop trying to solve the problem. They start trying to protect themselves. They argue to preserve dignity. They defend to avoid shame. They attack to regain power. They withdraw to avoid feeling exposed. At that point, the original issue is buried under emotional armor. Emotionally intelligent people interrupt this pattern. They do not always avoid conflict. In fact, many of them are quite willing to face difficult conversations. But they approach conflict differently. They do not treat the tension as proof that the relationship is failing. They do not confuse discomfort with danger. And they do not let one charged moment define the whole person in front of them. That changes the entire atmosphere. They stay anchored in what is actually happening now. They speak to behavior rather than condemning identity. They name impact without escalating contempt. They listen for what is underneath the defense. They repair faster because they are not trying to win the emotional war. That is maturity. Let's go even deeper. One of the most powerful people skills in the world is the ability to make someone feel respected while still being honest. That is not the same as sugarcoating. It is not avoiding truth. It is not becoming vague to keep the peace. It is knowing how to deliver truth without unnecessary humiliation. That matters because people rarely resist feedback only because of the feedback. Often, they resist the emotional experience wrapped around it. If the message makes them feel cornered, belittled, exposed, or misjudged, their defenses rise before the actual content can land. So emotionally intelligent people understand timing, tone, framing, emotional context. Instead of unloading frustration, they create conditions where truth has a chance to be heard. That might mean asking, "Is this a good time to talk about something important?" It might mean starting with shared intention. It might mean speaking from impact rather than accusation. It might mean staying specific instead of global. It might mean refusing to use old pain as ammunition in a current moment. That is skill. That is discipline. That is emotional intelligence in action. And because most people have experienced honesty used as a weapon, they notice immediately when someone tells the truth with care. It feels different. It feels cleaner. Less ego-driven. More trustworthy. Again, not soft. Trustworthy. That is why emotionally intelligent people often become anchors in teams, families, friendships, and partnerships. They reduce emotional chaos. They make clarity more possible. They bring tension down without denying reality. People remember who made hard things easier to face. Now here is another reason emotionally intelligent people are so hard to ignore. They are not desperate to be seen. That might sound strange at first because many people assume being noticed requires more performance, more self-promotion, more talking, more proving. But desperate energy has a cost. People feel when someone is trying too hard to secure validation in the room. They feel when attention is being chased instead of earned. They feel when a person's words are less about contribution and more about self-confirmation. that energy creates subtle distance. Because when someone needs too much from the moment stops feeling mutual. Emotionally intelligent people often carry a different kind of energy. They are less frantic for approval, because their sense of worth is not entirely outsourced to immediate reactions. They still care. They are still human. They are not above insecurity, but they are less governed by it. That changes how they speak, how they listen, how they move, how much they need from other people in real time. They can let a pause breathe. They do not rush to fill silence just to feel relevant. They do not over-explain every point to force agreement. They do not need to dominate every room to feel significant. And ironically, that is often what makes them more compelling. Because grounded people create space, and space has gravity. This is something many people learn too late. Presence is not only about what you project, it is also about what you do not force. Some people drain attention by constantly reaching for it. Others draw attention because they are rooted enough not to grab for it. That is the difference. Think about the people who feel quietly powerful. Often, they are not the ones performing intensity every second. They are the ones whose attention feels deliberate, whose words feel chosen, whose emotional tone does not scream for reassurance. There is a calmness in them, not passivity. Calmness. And calmness, when it is genuine, is magnetic. Because most people are overstimulated, reactive, scattered, and emotionally crowded inside themselves. So when they meet someone who feels settled, the contrast is immediate. It feels like oxygen. It feels like relief. It feels like someone has turned down the noise. That is memorable. But there is another layer to this calm presence, and most people miss it. Emotionally intelligent people do not confuse self-expression with constant self-exposure. In a culture that often glorifies total emotional spill, it can seem like maturity means showing everything instantly and everywhere. But discernment matters. Timing matters. Context matters. Emotional honesty does not require emotional dumping. That distinction protects relationships. Not every feeling needs immediate expression. Not every reaction deserves a microphone. Not every internal storm is ready to be handed to someone else. Emotionally intelligent people know how to ask, what is the wise use of this feeling? Sometimes the answer is to speak. Sometimes the answer is to wait. Sometimes the answer is to process privately before bringing it into the relationship. Sometimes the answer is to recognize that a temporary emotional wave does not need permanent relational consequences. That restraint is not repression. It is stewardship. And stewardship of your emotional world makes you more trustworthy. Because other people learn that your feelings matter to you, but they are not going to be used recklessly. This becomes especially important in close relationships, where people often assume emotional closeness gives them permission to abandon emotional responsibility. They say things they would never say if they were regulated. They use intimacy as a license for carelessness. They call it honesty, but often it is just unfiltered reactivity that slowly destroys safety. Emotionally intelligent people do not do this perfectly, but they understand the principle. The closer the relationship, the more responsibility their emotional behavior carries. They know that familiarity is not an excuse for sloppiness. If anything, closeness requires more care, not less. That makes their presence feel mature. And maturity is deeply attractive, whether in friendship, love, leadership, or everyday human interaction. Now let's move into something even more important. People skills. A lot of people hear that phrase and think of charisma, networking, charm, or being socially smooth. But true people skills go much deeper than surface likability. At the highest level, people skills are the ability to interact in a way that protects dignity, builds trust, reduces friction, and creates emotional clarity. That is not fake charm. That is human mastery. People with strong emotional intelligence understand that every interaction carries invisible emotional stakes. People want to feel respected. They want to feel they matter. They want to feel they are not being diminished, ignored, or handled carelessly. So emotionally intelligent people do small things that have large effects. They remember details because attention is a form of respect. They notice when someone is being left out. They do not embarrass others casually for entertainment. They know how to disagree without making someone feel stupid. They can read when humor is connecting and when it is covering discomfort. They make room for other people's humanity. That matters more than flashy social technique ever will. Because flashy technique can get attention. But dignifying behavior builds trust. And trust outlasts impression. Here is something subtle but powerful. Emotionally intelligent people tend to make other people feel more like themselves, more at ease, more able to speak, more able to think, more able to relax into the conversation. That is a gift. Most people do the opposite without meaning to. Their anxiety makes the conversation tight. Their self-focus makes it lopsided. Their need to impress makes it performative. Their poor listening makes it tiring. Their insecurity makes it competitive. So, when someone enters a conversation and makes others feel more open rather than more contracted, it stands out. This is why some people are unforgettable, even if they are not the most entertaining person in the room. People do not only remember who dazzled them, they remember who made them feel human. That is rare. And this is where people skills become something more than social polish. They become emotional leadership. Emotional leadership is the ability to influence the tone of an interaction without controlling it. It is the ability to bring steadiness, respect, warmth, and clarity into the room in a way that changes how others respond. It does not require formal authority. It happens in ordinary conversations all the time. A person walks into tension and lowers the temperature. A person notices exclusion and makes space. A person responds to awkwardness with ease instead of judgment. A person brings sincerity where others are performing. A person stays kind under stress and changes the whole feeling of the room. That is leadership, not always visible, but deeply felt. Emotionally intelligent people often have this effect because they understand that emotions are contagious. Tone spreads. Defensiveness spreads. Calm spreads. Respect spreads. Curiosity spreads. Contempt spreads even faster. So they take responsibility for what they are bringing into the room. Not in an obsessive way, in an aware way. They ask themselves, sometimes silently, what kind of experience they are creating. They understand that relationships are shaped not only by intention, but by emotional impact. That makes them different, because many people live inside intention alone. They think, "I did not mean it that way," as if intention erases impact. But emotionally intelligent people care about both. They care what they meant, and they care how it landed. Not because they are fragile, because they are accountable. And accountable people are hard to ignore. Now, here is where it gets even deeper. One of the reasons emotionally intelligent people stand out is that they are often less threatened by reality. That may sound abstract, but it matters in every area of life. If something is true, they want to know it. If they hurt someone, they want to understand it. If a relationship is strained, they do not need endless denial to feel safe. If they have a blind spot, they are more willing to face it. If something needs repair, they would rather address it than keep performing peace. That makes them strong in a way that ego-driven people are not. Because fragile ego needs illusion. Emotional intelligence can tolerate truth. And truth tolerance is one of the most attractive qualities a human being can have. Why? Because it makes growth possible. It makes repair possible. It makes honest intimacy possible. Think about how difficult it is to be close to someone who cannot tolerate uncomfortable truth. Every conversation becomes delicate. Every issue becomes a threat. Every feedback moment becomes emotional landmine territory. Over time, honesty starts disappearing from the relationship because it feels too expensive. That is not closeness. That is careful distance. Emotionally intelligent people create the opposite effect. Their willingness to face what is real invites honesty. People feel they do not have to hide as much, cushion every truth, or disguise every concern. That makes relationships deeper, cleaner, more alive. It also makes these people more resilient. Because resilience is not the absence of emotion. It is the capacity to move through emotion without losing yourself. It is the ability to bend without becoming broken by every internal wave. It is the strength to stay awake to reality instead of constantly escaping it. Emotionally intelligent people build that resilience over time. Through reflection, through restraint, through repair, through humility, through learning to stay with discomfort long enough to hear what it is trying to teach. That is why they often seem different under pressure. Pressure reveals structure. When life becomes difficult, people fall back on what they have practiced. If they have practiced blame, they blame. If they have practiced avoidance, they disappear. If they have practiced denial, they distort reality. If they have practiced self-awareness, regulation, empathy, and honest communication, those qualities begin showing up exactly when they matter most. And that is when people really become unforgettable. Not when everything is easy, when things are hard. Anyone can seem pleasant when life is smooth. Character becomes visible under friction. That is why emotionally intelligent people are so compelling. They often bring their best qualities not only into comfort, but into stress. They stay more human in hard moments, more thoughtful, more grounded, more capable of dignity under pressure. That leaves an impression that runs deep. Most people miss this when trying to become more magnetic. They focus on surface upgrades, better lines, better posture, better branding, better image control. Some of that may help in small ways, but the kind of presence people truly remember usually comes from inner work made visible. You become more compelling when you become more aware, more present, more honest, more emotionally responsible, more able to see others clearly without losing yourself. That kind of growth changes the atmosphere around you. And atmosphere matters. Sometimes what makes a person unforgettable is not a specific event. It is the total emotional climate they create. Around them, people feel less judged, more settled, more seen, more respected, more willing to tell the truth, more able to exhale. That kind of atmosphere is rare because it cannot be faked for long. It emerges from how a person relates to themselves and others over time. And this is where the identity shift begins. If you want to become someone people experience that way, the path is not to perform emotional intelligence. The path is to practice it, quietly, repeatedly, in moments no one claps for. When you notice defensiveness rising and choose curiosity. When you feel hurt and choose honesty over punishment. When you listen to understand instead of to control. When you name your emotion without outsourcing responsibility for it. When you pause before reacting. When you apologize cleanly. When you respect another person's dignity, even in tension. When you tell the truth without contempt. When you stop making every feeling the other person's burden to carry. These are not glamorous moments, but they build magnetic character. Most people want the effect without the discipline. They want presence without self-awareness, influence without regulation, connection without empathy, respect without accountability. It does not work that way. The good news is that emotional intelligence is not reserved for a gifted few. It is built, slowly, imperfectly, intentionally, through attention and practice, through noticing patterns that used to control you, through becoming more honest about the emotional habits that cost you trust, through learning to stay with discomfort long enough to choose a wiser response. This is where everything changes. Because once you begin doing that work, your relationships start shifting in ways that are subtle but profound. People open up more. Defensiveness drops faster. Conflict becomes more workable. You stop carrying as much unnecessary drama. You feel less captive to mood and more anchored in choice. And something else happens too. You begin respecting yourself more. That matters. Because emotional intelligence is not only about being easier for other people to be around, it is about becoming someone you can rely on from the inside. Someone who can be honest without cruelty, soft without weakness, strong without aggression, open without losing boundaries, aware without becoming self-obsessed. That inner trust changes your whole presence. People can feel when someone has become less divided within themselves. There is a steadiness there, a simplicity, a lack of desperate performance. Not because life is perfect, because the person has learned how to carry themselves with more integrity. And integrity has a presence all its own. Before we close, there is one more truth worth facing. A lot of what people call being ignored in life is not always about visibility. Sometimes it is about emotional friction. Sometimes people keep a distance, not because you lack value, but because being around you feels harder than it needs to. Too reactive, too guarded, too self-focused, too unpredictable, too fragile under truth, too disconnected from what others feel. That may be hard to hear, but it is also freeing. Because if the problem were only surface charm, the solution would stay superficial. But if the real issue is emotional intelligence, then the path forward is deeper and more hopeful. It means you can become easier to trust, easier to connect with, easier to feel safe around, easier to remember for the right reasons, not by becoming louder, by becoming clearer, not by forcing attention, by becoming someone whose presence carries weight. That is a much more powerful path, and it changes every part of life. Your conversations become cleaner. Your relationships become deeper. Your conflicts become wiser. Your self-respect becomes stronger. Your presence becomes harder to ignore, not because you demanded to be noticed, but because people feel something real in you. Something grounded, something aware, something emotionally trustworthy. That stays with people. So, if this resonates with you, pay close attention to the quiet moments that reveal your emotional habits. Notice what makes you reactive. Notice where your ego rushes in. Notice when you stop listening. Notice what happens in your body before your tone changes. Notice the stories you tell yourself in moments of discomfort. Notice where your pain becomes someone else's problem. Notice where your fear disguises itself as certainty. Do not notice these things to shame yourself. Notice them so you can become free. Because freedom is not having no emotions. Freedom is no longer being ruled by them. And once you begin living from that place, your presence changes. Your words carry more weight because they come from clarity. Your empathy becomes more real because it is not tangled with self-protection. Your relationships deepen because people feel safer telling the truth. Your calm becomes more genuine because it is built on awareness, not avoidance. Little by little, you become the kind of person who does not need to force significance. You carry it, and people feel it. In the end, emotionally intelligent people are so hard to ignore for a very simple reason. They make people feel what so many rarely feel in modern life: understood without being handled, respected without being managed, seen without being judged, and safe without being controlled. That experience is rare. That experience is powerful. And that experience leaves a mark. So the work is not to become more impressive. It is to become more awake, more honest, more steady, more compassionate, more responsible with what you feel and what you bring into the lives of others. That is what creates real presence. And when you live that way, you do not just become more noticeable. You become the kind of person others trust, remember, and quietly return to. Not because you demanded attention, because your emotional intelligence made people feel the difference.